Hello, everyone. We'll get started in a minute. I want to make sure everyone can join us. All right, everyone, we'll get started in a minute. I don't see anyone else coming in. It looks like we're good to start. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our stakeholder forum tonight for the Sacramento Regional Water Bank. I am Jim Pfeiffer. I am the Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority. Go to the next slide. Briefly about the Regional Water Authority, our mission is to serve, represent, and align the interests of regional water providers and stakeholders for the purpose of improving water supply reliability, availability, quality, and affordability. Again, thank you for joining us tonight on this stakeholder forum, and I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Ojakian. Ryan?
Great, thanks, Jim. So going to cover a few ground rules here and then do some introductions, and then we'll get into the core presentation. So ground rules, I think, I'm sorry, I'm having a technical, everybody can hear me still, correct? Great, thanks. So ground rules, just be sure to reach out to Atlee Keller. You can see the instructions on the slide, but be sure to reach out to Atlee Keller. Her email is atlee.keller@stantec.com if you're having any technical issues. Otherwise, please be courteous, please participate, and please be specific in that participation. Next slide, please. So here's the agenda that we're going to go through tonight. We're going to get to introductions, some basics on groundwater banking, then an overview of the Sacramento Regional Water Bank, the project that we're here to discuss, and then some updates on what has occurred in terms of regional coordination, environmental compliance, and then really what's coming in the next year in 2024. And then we'll open it up for questions on anything that you would like to ask at that stage. Next slide, please. So for introductions, I want to introduce myself. I probably should have done that. Ryan Ojakian with the Regional Water Authority. In the room with us here today is Jim Pfeiffer, the Executive Director of RWA, who kicked us off, and Trevor Joseph, also with RWA, and then Heather Waltrip with Stantec is going to be part of the presentation. She is with us. And then we have other members of the Stantec team here in the room. And then you all should be able to see who all is participating in this webinar as well. And that's who we have with us here this evening. So next slide, please. Also want to be clear here at the top that the water bank has 20 contributing members or partners, I should say, and those are listed here on the screen. And so they all have a presence here in the project. Next slide. Great. So now we're going to get into the core presentation here. We're kicking off with water bank basics. And this is background. A number of you may be familiar with water banking, but we want to make sure that everybody's at the same level of understanding or to the greatest extent possible. So next slide, please. The key to water banking is advancing groundwater recharge. And there are a number of ways in which you can do recharge. Here in the Sacramento Water Bank project is really, there are two primary ways in which we're doing recharge, and that's direct injection through ASR wells, And then the vast majority of the recharge that we're going to be doing is in the recharge. We've broken these down in this slide into two categories of natural recharge and artificial recharge. I would say that in-the recharge really has a foot in both natural and artificial. Just keep that in mind as we're moving forward. Next slide, please. So what is water banking? Water banking, as I mentioned, is recharging your underground aquifers. And then really the other element of it is keeping track of how much you're depositing and how much you're withdrawing. And so a large portion of what water banking is taking physical actions, but marrying those with paper or accounting actions, and making sure that those two things, the physical actions and the accounting actions, are aligned with each other. Next slide, please. So why is water banking a important thing to be considering? And that really gets back to some of the historical ways in which water has been managed. Now, historically, we've had a robust snowpack that has supplied a surface water system of water delivery, and groundwater has sort of been groundwater management has been taking place where it's convenient. Now, moving forward with climate change, we have to think about that a little bit different. So the thing that I like to think about here is surface water is 10% of all the fresh water on the planet, and groundwater is 90%. We built a system based on that 10%, and climate change is dramatically impacting that 10%. And we need to find a way to buffer that and address that with that 90% of water that we have not yet been managing to the extent that we could be. The other thing that I would like everybody to be aware of as we move off of this slide is that the groundwater basins in our region have twice the capacity of Folsom Reservoir. So about 2 million acre feet as compared to 1 million acre feet. Those are just some things to keep in sort of the back of your mind as we move forward through this evening's presentation, and just in general as we talk about the water bank here locally. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of sorry, we were having a little bit of technical difficulty. 1 second. Okay. Just a little bit of where is the Sacramento Regional Water Bank located. So it's both the North American and South American subbasins. For those of you who don't follow groundwater subbasins closely, that's Sacramento, Placer, portions of Sutter and Placer County, and the vast majority of Sacramento County. Additionally, for frame of reference, it's the American River runs through in between, or the middle of those two basins, but is bounded in the north by the Feather River, in the west by the Sacramento River, in the south by the Cosumnes River, and then in the east by the Sierra Nevada foothills. Next slide, please. So I think also by way of background, it's important to know who the players are. So Regional Water Authority, RWA, is the lead on the project, but also, again, we put the program participants up earlier, so that those are members of RWA, but that is not all of RWA's membership. Also important to be aware of is there are external partners, and there are state and federal agencies, and then there are all of you who are participating and others of stakeholders. Next slide, please. I think one of the things that we really need to also be cognizant of as we have these discussions around the water bank is that the water bank does not exist in a vacuum, that it is regulated and needs to be in compliance with numerous things, of which include SGMA, environmental laws, a host of other state and federal policies and requirements, and then also importantly here locally, the local water forum agreement. Next slide, please. The other thing that I think, and I'm pretty sure this is my last slide, that everybody should be aware of is that water banking is not new. There are a host of water banks that exist in California, but what is a little bit unique with this particular project is that it would be the first water bank in the Sacramento Valley, and that those other water banks, the process by which you establish a water bank being established there are in the San Joaquin Valley. And I think that concludes my portion of the presentation, and I'm going to be passing it over to Trevor at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. So my name is Trevor Joseph. I'm with the Regional Water Authority. I'm the Manager of Technical Services, and I'm leading the project management of the Regional Water, Sacramento Regional Water Bank on behalf of the program participants Ryan pointed out earlier. Tonight, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of where we're at with developing the Sacramento Regional Water Bank and touch on some of the policy and technical work that's been accomplished. If you've been with us during any of the prior stakeholder forum meetings, there may be some repetition, but there will certainly be some new activities and accomplishments that we'll point out as we go through these slides. Next slide. So I think it's important first to discuss the facilities as it relates to recharge and recovery. So this project is dependent on existing facilities only. There are actually no construction or planning involved in part of this project. The existing facilities are required to recharge and store water as well as recover water. And so what you see here again is the North and South American subbasins shown with some of the major surface water conveyance as well as treatment plant and diversion facilities. So those are the facilities, again, the existing facilities that the water bank, when it starts implementing, will use to capture excess surface water, both on the American and the Sacramento River, and recharge that water. So they'll divert surface water directly and treat through these facilities. Again, as Ryan mentioned, using either in-lieu recharge or direct injection into wells. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then on the recovery side, when we need to call on that water that's banked underground, we'll use a series of existing, largely municipal wells, again, in this area. Those are not shown here. They're kind of too numerous to illustrate kind of effectively at this scale. But again, they're existing wells that will be used to recover that stored surface water underground. Next slide. So really kind of two sets of slides here to explain a little bit more detail in terms of how the water bank is going to recharge, store, and then recover groundwater. So, this picture on the right here obviously shows Folsom Reservoir in a spilling time where there's excess flows, potentially, and there's spilling water into the American River. How the water bank works is from the in-lieu side, you're reducing groundwater use and actually then creating an in-lieu recharge benefit. So because, again, there's excess surface water, you can take that water through those treatment and diversion structures I mentioned on the prior slide. and alleviate or reduce the amount of groundwater that would normally be pumped during that period. Therefore, groundwater use would decrease and surface water use would increase. And the bank, it's estimated that we could store up to 65,000 acre feet a year during these periods in the groundwater basin. So what that physically does is depicted on the left in that conceptual drawing of the water table, the depth at which you encounter groundwater beneath our feet. That water table would increase, again, largely due to in lieu in some direct recharge using wells. Next slide. So on the recovery side, and again, Folsom Reservoir, this time in a period, in this case, it's a photo from 2015, which was the historic drought for this region. Obviously, storage levels in Folsom at that time went down to record lows. And the benefit of the bank is now if you've recharged and added water to the groundwater basin, you can call upon that water, again through wells, and recover that water and put it to beneficial use. And also then reduces the amount of surface water that would normally be taken during this period on our streams and creeks. And of course, this is a benefit to the environment during those times. So there's ecosystem as well as local agency benefit. And depicted on the left, again, a conceptual drawing that there, in this case, you'd be drawing the water table down, again, recovering that water that you've previously banked underground. Next slide. So that's one way to look at it. Let's talk about it in terms of numbers. And again, if you've been with us on the prior stakeholder forum, we characterize this slightly differently in different charts, but I think this might make a little more sense and be a little more intuitive in terms of how we get to these volumes. So what the region did back in 2019 is completed what was described as the Regional Water Reliability Plan. And looking again at existing infrastructure in the greater Sacramento region and looking at how water was used to meet demands, both groundwater and surface water, they evaluated 3 wet years, taking the average of 2011 through 2013 conditions and looked at how local agencies in the region met demands. And what was discovered is that groundwater made up 31% and surface water 69% of demands during that wet time. During dry periods, and again, 2015, it was a good year to use for understanding how demands were met during dry periods. Groundwater was used 36% to meet demands and surface water 64%. Now, total water use was reduced due to drought conservation actions implemented by the local agencies, but still you can see kind of the proportions of surface water versus groundwater use. Next. Great. And so with wet years, what was discovered in the Regional Water Reliability Plan is, again, with existing infrastructure, if you could reoperate that infrastructure and take excess surface water, you could increase the amount of surface water use to meet demands up to potentially 84% and reduce the amount of groundwater to 14%. Now, sharp eyes here, that doesn't quite equal 100%. These are some rounding errors we just didn't address, but pretty darn close. And you can see that recharge, so through in lieu methods, equates to about 65,000 acre feet, what we showed on that previous slide. Next animation. And conversely, in dry periods, it was discovered that, again, using existing infrastructure, we could increase the groundwater use, recovering that surface water stored underground, and decrease the surface water use to meet demands from to 59% groundwater use and 41% surface water use. Again, that's that 55,000 acre feet approximately, recovering that groundwater now that has been made available through our recharge actions that are occurring before we recover the water. Next slide. So in summary, the benefits of the water bank and these actions will provide local and regional water supply reliability, provide benefits to the ecosystem, fish and wildlife, provide some water quality benefits and economic benefits to the region. Next slide. So how we're approaching this project, and Heather's going to discuss this more in terms of the environmental process and get into some additional details. But again, I just want to stress what the project includes and also what it does not include. So new facilities, as I've mentioned, are not proposed or part of this project. There's no changes in surface water rights. Contract supplies are not being proposed. Here we're looking again at excess surface water supplies for the purposes of recharge. And out-of-basin transfers are not currently proposed as part of this project. I will talk a little bit about the opportunity for transferring water in a subsequent slide, but currently this is not proposed as part of the project, as it's too difficult to foresee exactly what these transfers would look like at this time. Next slide. All right, so what have we done to develop this project? Again, I mentioned there's really no design, there is no design, there's no infrastructure, it's using existing infrastructure. This project is largely about governance, accounting, planning, and environmental work to make sure that we can operate the water bank consistent with the goals and objectives that we've laid out for this project. Next slide. So again, if you've been with us on prior stakeholder forum meetings, we have shown this kind of simplified schedule graphic or timeline for developing the water bank. It's not a linear timeline, as you can see. As we get into stage 3, it continues for really kind of more than a year and a half. The major activities are shown here on the bars at the bottom of the graphic here. We like to point out that we have a proof of concept in that this region has done a lot of historic conjunctive use activities and has banked water previously through those efforts and has completed a lot of recharge. So we're very confident that this project can work and will work because we have seen success in implementing conjunctive use in the past. So where we're at right now is obviously communication engagement continues throughout the life of the project. We have some engagement with state, federal, and external entities. I'll talk more about that. Governance and institutional, we've been working on that. We have reported out that a little bit at prior stakeholder forum. And we are working through the CEQA process, again, which Heather will talk about more in a few minutes. I did want to point out that this project, one of the main goals is to obtain federal recognition or acknowledgement with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Ryan showed a slide that showed where prior water banks were throughout the state, and this will be the first water bank that is located north of the Delta that is federally recognized. Next slide. So that was the simplified. This is a slightly more detailed list of activities that we're working on to develop the bank. We have accomplished and developed a goals, objectives, principles, and constraints document through a lot of input from external parties as well as public input that we received at a prior stakeholder forum meeting. That is on our website. We've developed a governance structure that includes both roles and responsibilities and an organizational structure, I should say, that describes how the bank will be implemented. That document is also on our website. Right now, we're starting to work through the water accounting system, how water will be tracked and accounted for as part of the bank. I'm going to touch on that as we're just starting it, that process in a slide or two. There's still work to be done as it relates to contractual, financial, legal work. We've gone through, started the scoping process. Project description has been developed. The CEQA work, again, I will not go into that in detail, but again, Heather will touch on that. And then there's work that's in progress that continues related to just the costs it requires to develop this project, working with contractors, and then communication engagement. Again, we've developed a series of stakeholder forums. We do a lot of questions and answer that we make available on our website, as well as updating our website and including it with a lot of information and videos to describe the water bank project. And if you have not been to our website, I strongly encourage you to go there, and we will show the links to that site at the end of this presentation. Next slide. All right, so we call this the GO-PC, the goal, objectives, principles, constraints. Again, this group of stakeholders at the prior stakeholder forum and others have weighed into this document that we developed draft, and we've completed this. Next slide. And I kind of have this up there for folks that are potentially new to tonight's discussion, just to make sure that everybody is kind of informed of what we've completed here. The importance of this document, again, is it describes the intent and the end state of activities that the program committee, those 20 agencies, want us to achieve with this project. So the goal is that end state of activities, and is important because it serves as really the foundational, essentially, overarching rationale for the project. The objectives are the next layer down. They represent the current and best intent to address various aspects of water management issues, and they provide the detail in terms of how the goal will be achieved, as well as how we'll measure success. Principles then again are another layer down, statements of shared values in terms of the water bank development and implementation, the basis for decision making. Now, for those of you that have seen the principles, I'm not going to get into those tonight. There's multiple principles in different categories. There's quite a lot there to kind of look at and take into consideration. And then finally, constraints are factors that shape or limit the bank in terms of how it can be developed, evaluated, and implemented. And again, there's quite a few constraints, and I'm not going to get into those tonight as well for the sake of everybody's time. Next slide. So I will reiterate the goal of the water bank development project, and the water bank goal is to improve long-term regional reliability and provide statewide water supply opportunities when possible, and support healthy ecosystem function on the Lower American River. There are multiple objectives, 10 listed here. I'm not going to go through all of those. I'm not going to go through actually for the sake of time, but they are those items that we want to measure success against. Next slide. Governance. Again, I mentioned this document is on our website. Again, it's been developed based on input from the public over a series of months. Delineates the essential functions and activities to successfully implement the bank, and includes that organizational framework and roles and responsibilities. Next slide. So at its core, the water bank governance structure for implementation looks like this. There's participating agencies. Those, of course, are those 20 agencies that I mentioned. They, of course, have the ultimate not only responsibility, but the water bank obviously does not exist without those agencies. They're the ones that actually have the infrastructure, the water to make this project happen. And so there's a series of operation activities identified in this governance document that participating agencies will be responsible for to make water available and make those benefits and outcomes possible that we showed earlier in this presentation. There will be a coordinating body that is the participating agencies representatives. So it'll be an arm from the participating agencies, and they will be ultimately responsible for making sure that the bank operates consistent with the GO-PC, that goal, objective, principles, constraints document, and making sure that it's coordinated and implemented in such a way that it meets the policy requirements and goals that we set out for this project. And then there will be a management and administrative series of, or role, I should say, that helps coordinate activities and administers the banking on behalf of the participating agencies. And at this time, the Regional Water Authority has been identified to serve that role in implementation. So obviously we're developing the project, and this is all about implementing the bank. Next slide. And so there are a lot of other parties, obviously, that have a role with the bank and implementing the bank, kind of going from top to bottom or clockwise here. There's stakeholders, obviously folks on this call, interested parties, advocates, and they receive benefits from the water banking project. Engagement with stakeholders is paramount, obviously, on developing and implementing the project. There's potentially external partners. These are entities that could either bank their own supplies or be benefactors from banked water in the banking area. Again, at this time, we do not have cannot foresee exactly what that might look like in terms of the details of that those actions, but there certainly exists that opportunity as described also in our goal statement. At the bottom, there's groundwater sustainability agencies. Groundwater sustainability agencies are not regulatory. I mean, they are regulatory agencies of the groundwater system, but they're really partners in how the bank will be implemented. The banking, governing, and coordinating body will need to be working closely with GSAs, and GSAs will need to be working closely with the water bank to make sure that the bank is operated in such a way that it's providing benefits to the groundwater sustainability plans. There's ability to share data and information and support each other. It's important to note that within each groundwater sustainability plan, both the North American and South American, the water bank, the Sacramento Regional Water Bank is identified as one of the solutions or the projects or management actions to help maintain or achieve sustainability. So again, there's a lot of synergy between GSAs and the water bank. And then finally, local, state, and federal agencies, as mentioned, federal recognition or acknowledgement is key to provide some flexibility in terms of how the bank's implemented, and they have a role in terms of permitting and some oversight. Obviously, the federal government also operates some of the important surface water features in our region. Next slide. So this is information that may be more new to folks that have been on every stakeholder forum. Water accounting system. So as Ryan pointed out, accounting of water recharged and then stored and recovered is important element, foundational element for operating an effective bank. All water banks have an accounting system. Currently, we're working through a series of functional elements and organized under modules to develop a water accounting system for the water bank. This framework is being discussed with program participants right now, those 20 agencies on the program committee. We're working through a series of modules and then sharing that with the public as we have an opportunity to do so. This is very much still kind of, even though we discussed 2 modules, kind of an initial overview and cracked into the second module, still very much at the beginning of this process. Let's move to the next slide. So one important concept that needs to be kind of discussed is just how the water accounting system works in terms of documenting and archiving water banked, as well as how that works with the existing water budgets of groundwater sustainability plans. So let me start with the groundwater sustainability defined water budget. So each groundwater sustainability plan in the North American and South American has its own defined water budget. And in those budgets are beneficial uses, and those are withdrawals. So for urban and municipal, for agricultural, for the environment, there's a water budget that's highly detailed in those documents that lays out not only the current pumping estimates for those beneficial uses, but also a projection that includes proposed or known land use changes, as well as the potential effects of the environment on the limits of natural recharge that might limit the amount of natural recharge that occurs in the basin. So it gets pretty detailed, the planning requirements to look at water budgets now and projected water budgets into the future. There's also water leaves basins or comes into basins through subsurface flow between basin boundaries. We do not have basin boundaries that are hard barriers to flow. So there is an estimate based on a lot of modeling work of how much water enters or leaves our groundwater basin. So the budgets developed by each GSA for each of those subbasins defines what conditions are going to be necessary in terms of recharge and projects to maintain a sustainable or balanced budget over a 20-year implementation horizon in SGMA. And so that budget in itself is its own unit of accounting, if you will, within the groundwater basin. Next slide. So the water bank is an accounting that is separate, although physically, obviously in the same groundwater basin, but it's a separate counting structure. So with the water bank, we're going to be recharging, as we laid out and described previously, and recovering that volume of water, again, as described on prior slides. What's interesting here is obviously there's water that is lost from the water bank, similar to subsurface flows that are shown on the budget, the GSP defined water budget. There are going to be a certain amount of flows that may be lost from the water that is put into the water bank account just through subsurface boundary flows. There's also potential losses that could occur or will occur due to accretions to streams and then depletions from streams. So if you're changing the water table near a connected surface water feature, like a stream or a creek, you're changing that slope essentially from the creek to the groundwater table. And if you increase that slope, if you raise the water table, you're actually causing accretions to the streams and creeks. And so some water would be lost due to those accretions, meaning the streams or creeks are receiving more water because you're putting more water into the basin. And conversely, when you pump groundwater and there's interconnected surface water, you're actually causing stream depletion. And so those factors need to be looked at in terms of losses. It gets pretty complicated, and it's a major groundwater modeling effort to look at that closely. And then finally, there's leave behind. And so the leave behind is influenced by science, but also policy. This is an opportunity for the water bank to leave a certain percent of water behind and not recover that water, specifically to meet sustainability or maintain sustainability in the basin, to assist with maintaining sustainability in the basin, I should say. So the program committee at this point, developing the bank, have looked at that, and if there's any external partner activity, have identified a 5% leave behind at this point for water accounting as part of the bank. And again, I know this gets kind of complicated. That number, though, is essentially, you could equate it to every dollar you put in the bank, you recover only 95 cents of that dollar. That's another way to look at that 5%. So this concept of just understanding how the accounting is going to work, again, it's all in the same basin. but there's different accounts that need to be managed, and the water bank is going to be a separate account. And the final thing I'll say again is that the GSP water budgets, the fine water budgets, really are necessary and to meet sustainability for the basin. The water bank is largely on top of that. It's water that's added to the basin and exercised on top of what's needed for sustainability. So we're utilizing that account to, again, recharge, store, and then recover, but at no point ever recover more than we've recharged. A lot there, but that's kind of the concept on water accounting. And as we get into, as I showed on the prior slide, additional modules related to how we develop a water accounting system, it only gets a little more complicated, unfortunately, as we talk about how the bank will operate. But it has been done, as I mentioned, in many other regions throughout the state. It's just a function of how the water bank is going to account for the amount of recharge and recovery. Next slide. All right. Couple more slides and I'll turn it over to Heather. So we, again, have had previous stakeholder forum meetings. We kind of had a kickoff stakeholder forum meeting in October of last year. And then we had a meeting in February. We went through some of the goal, objective, principles, constraints, and some other elements at that time. It's been a little while. We worked on governance and accounting. With that comes a lot of modeling work. And again, that work we're still in the process of working on, and we have a ways to go. So it's just because we haven't been at a stakeholder forum a little bit, it isn't because we haven't been very, very busy. One of the items that we've been busy at and did reach out, of course, to stakeholders was the public scoping meetings, which were held in October. Those were in-person meetings. Frankly, we only got a couple of individuals in the South American Subbasin meeting. We did not see really anybody at the North American Subbasin meeting, but we did have a good discussion with those folks in the South American Subbasins, and so we appreciate that input. And as I mentioned, we have a new website. Next slide. All right, environmental compliance. I'm going to turn this over to Heather and let her go through this. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Trevor. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay, but if not, please let me know. Go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll start a brief discussion on the environmental compliance process. Next slide, thank you. So I wanted to start with a real broad overview of the environmental review process. We're in the very preliminary stages. As Trevor mentioned, we did initiate the scoping period. The notice of preparation was released in September of this year, and we conducted a 30-day scoping period where we had held 2 in-person public meetings and received comments and letters regarding the scope and content of the EIR. The red arrow shows that like I said, we're very preliminarily in the environmental review process. The project description is still under refinement. And once we've completed that, we'll move into the preparation of the draft EIR. Once the document is completed, we'll release that for public review. And so there'll be another opportunity for public input on the project, the environmental review. And that is probably about, I think we have a schedule on one of the slides coming up, but that's probably in about a year's time that we're expecting the EIR to be released for public review. Once the EIR has been reviewed, we'll gather comments on that and go back and prepare a final EIR and then release that for public review prior to adoption by the Regional Water Authority of the project or the draft or the final EIR. Next slide. So just to touch a little bit on scoping, the scoping process is always important to, first of all, it's required as part of CEQA, particularly when an EIR is being prepared. The the process provides an overview of the project and just information on different aspects of the project, including public involvement opportunities. And so during the scoping period, as I mentioned, we held 2 scoping meetings where we provided information about the project and the process and provided an opportunity for the public to give us comments about the scope and content of the document. For those of you who are interested, the scoping presentations are available on the Water Bank website. The scoping process is closed, so all of the scoping comments have been reviewed and are being considered as we move forward through the environmental process. But if you are interested in seeing what the information is, it's a lot of the same information that's being provided tonight, but you're welcome to review those scoping meeting, that scoping meeting presentation on the website. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're in the very preliminary stages of environmental review. Just to provide a bit more information about the CEQA process, the Regional Water Authority is the CEQA lead agency. They have determined, or we have determined, that an EIR is the most appropriate form of analysis for the environmental review of the water bank. Again, the notice of preparation was issued on September 25th, and that initiated the 30-day scoping process. So that process was completed on October 25th. And the authority has reached out to Native American tribes that are within the project area in the North and South American subbasins. And consultation was initiated with those tribes, but to date, we haven't had any tribes reach out to request any additional consultation on the project. Next slide. So the CEQA guidelines recommend a large number of resources are evaluated as part of a project. Again, preliminarily, we have started looking at the potential impacts to these resources as a result of implementation of the project. And if we can go to the next slide, we've kind of narrowed down just a handful of resources that really could potentially be affected by the project. Not necessarily affected in a negative way, but there may be some resource that would be in some way impacted by the project. So we'll review all of these resources, determine if mitigation is appropriate, and then identify that and provide that as part of the implementation of the project. Next slide. So I wanted to touch on public involvement. Public involvement is a very important aspect of the CEQA process. And it's really the key purpose of CEQA, to engage the public and provide a good amount of information about the potential project effects on the environment and give decision makers the information that they need to determine if the project is something that they would like to move forward with. Early public consultation, like scoping, is really useful for discovering resources that maybe were not considered initially as part of project development. It also helps the authority to identify if there's any alternatives to the project, as well as identify any potential mitigation or permitting or other authorizations that may need to be undertaken by responsible or trustee agencies. And also it helps the lead agency determine if there's any resources that may not be affected, that maybe we, we're zeroing in on that maybe, is not necessarily an issue associated with the project. And so early consultation with not only the public, but resource agencies really is an effective way to consider and resolve issues and really frame the project so it's not as impacted to the environment. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it back over to Trevor to talk about next steps. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Okay, just a couple more slides here. Next slide. All right, same schedule that you saw previously. We're working, as mentioned, through governance and institutional. The water accounting system is really part of that governance and institutional element. I think we have probably through mid-2024, at least, before we get that framework done. And I'll explain how that relates to, at least in terms of a draft, in terms of the environmental process and schedule. Excuse me, on the next slide in just a minute. So on that slide, here it is. We are at this public stakeholder forum. I mentioned we're going to be working through the water accounting system. It's not shown here in the first and second quarters of 2024. A lot of modeling work that's going to start taking shape in that same time period. We should have a lot to discuss and targeting right now a stakeholder forum in the summer or late summer timeframe of next year when we have a good substantial amount of information to kind of work through and talk through and get input on. As it relates to Heather's points, there's a public draft EIR, meetings on that, 2025, additional stakeholder forum to discuss that, and then release of a final EIR, and then federal recognition is somewhere in that time period, and then we get into project implementation. So just another way to look at schedule, especially as it relates to the environmental process. Next slide. So for ongoing engagement, again, we have upcoming stakeholder forums. We do a lot of meetings with interested parties, NGOs, groundwater sustainability agencies, other state and federal agencies who are interested in the project. We do a lot of meetings. If you're interested in a meeting on the topic of the water bank, RWA is really open to meeting and discussing the project with entities on a kind of a one-on-one basis. So that is an option really that I just wanted to mention real quickly. If you're just interested more in the project as a whole, there's the environmental review meetings, there's the website that I mentioned. And again, we spent some time revamping this and putting a lot of information out there. If you have any input on that information, we can continuously evolve and revise that. So after you've had a chance to look at that, or if you have had a chance to look at that, please let us know what's working for you and if you can find the information that you're looking for. So again, we're available and really encourage you to reach out to us personally as we can help guide you on what's happening with the project. And if you're not on our email distribution list, please opt in for e-blasts and other updates. Again, those questions and answers that go out help kind of keep us current on what questions agencies or stakeholders have and how we can kind of address those in between stakeholder forum meetings. So it's a way for us to kind of continuously stay engaged with the public. So we encourage those questions as well. I think that might be it. And next slide. Yes, we're at the questions and answer stage. And so I'll turn it over and we'll see what's come through in terms of questions. I have to split my look over here at the questions. All right, which ones do we start with here?
You can start with this.
Okay. So Barbara Washburn has a statement, a question here. I joined a few minutes late, so I might have missed this info. But where do you plan to store the water? Just Folsom. What about in the aquifer, or is this part of the plan? If not, why not? Yeah, Barbara, yeah, good question. Yeah, and if you joined us a few minutes late, might have missed that. But yes, the water is stored underground. So we're storing water in our groundwater basins, both the South and North American subbasins. So the water is stored either through in-lieu recharge or direct recharge. And we kind of went through that process. Again, there's descriptions of how that works and even videos on our website. I encourage you to go there. And if you do not find, again, what you're looking for, please reach out to us and we can kind of walk you through that process. Looks like the next question, Barbara Evoy, can you describe more how you see the water bank contributing to watershed health? Yes, so the watershed ecosystem benefits as mentioned. So one way we look at this is the benefits that'll occur in dry periods. So if agencies and are able to store excess surface water underground and then call upon that groundwater in dry times, they're pumping less groundwater than they would normally have, or excuse me, they're using less surface water than they normally would have during those periods. They're pumping the groundwater that they've stored. So there are some benefits to the lower American River and our creeks and tributaries there, the Sac River and the American River in particular. There's, this is we didn't touch on this today. The American River Basin study that was done a few years ago identified the water bank as a climate adaptation project. So this project has some benefits in terms of looking at just addressing climate change. So those are the types of benefits that we're describing as part of this project. But let me know if you see other opportunities or other benefits. We'd love to hear from folks that really have a keen eye for that kind of topic.
I think Dave Richardson has had his hand up for a while.
Let's see. I see a question in the meantime, although maybe not the full question. 1 second.
Here's a question from Barbara Evoy.
All right, Barbara, I see another question. Barbara Evoy, what specific mechanisms, steps do you see in order to make sure you are not impacting GSA sustainability efforts? Yeah, good question. And that one is one that takes a lot of analysis and a framework to make sure that the banking actions complement, which is our intent, sustainability, aid in reaching sustainability as described in the GSPs, as opposed to creating any negative effects under Sigma. And so there's a lot to this. There are the modeling effort that we're undertaking. So looking at how we extract that water that's specifically banked in our groundwater basins, and looking at that to make sure that we're not impacting any beneficial uses and users of water. So that could be groundwater dependent ecosystems, that could be domestic well users or other users. Part of the efforts that we've done to date that we didn't touch on, we've done a lot of work to enhance our understanding of where domestic wells are in both the North and South American basins. Really that's done for a GSP perspective implementation, but also aids in the water bank so that we have a really good data set of where we know beneficial users are. Same thing with groundwater dependent ecosystems. The bank is going to have a monitoring program, monitoring plan, literally like a groundwater sustainability plan, possibly a lot of the same monitoring wells and maybe others, so that we can look at operations and adaptively manage the efforts as we implement them, so that we avoid impacting sustainability efforts. But I do want to stress that the bank, like prior conjunctive use, has aided and I can speak to the North American subbasin more strongly than the South, just because I'm not as familiar with that basin. But the sheer fact is that conjunctive use and prior banking efforts have actually aided the basin's ability to be sustainable. Would we have approved a groundwater sustainability plan in the North American subbasin without prior conjunctive use? It's highly questionable, to be honest. And so these projects, although they could create negative effects if we're not managing it and coordinating closely with GSAs and stakeholders, will provide a benefit to the basin, because over time, it'll increase the amount of water through that leave behind, in particular, that's there for sustainability purposes. Next question, Barbara Washburn, follow up. Do you plan to use excess floodwater from the American River for infiltration? Do you plan on using MAR, managed aquifer recharge, in farm fields or via dry wells? How would the water bank deal with a winter like 2022, 23? Thank you. Okay, 3 questions there. So, do you plan to use excess floodwater from the American River for infiltration? Yes. Infiltration, though, when I hear that, yes, we plan to use excess water from the American River. Infiltration, we plan to recharge by agencies shifting from pumping groundwater in years when there's excess surface water and taking more surface water. So that's going to create an in lieu recharge benefit. We actually see, based on that shift of operational behavior, if you will, then we see the water table actually, the amount of water in our basin increase, because those agencies are not pumping as much or groundwater like they would normally do so in a wet year. So they're optimizing how they operate and manage water through conjunctive use. So when I hear infiltration, I think of big spreading basins, kind of like the water banks in the San Joaquin Valley that spread water out over land and have it naturally infiltrate. That's not the type of recharge, for the most part, we're doing in our basin. There are some direct injection wells where we're doing that recharge, but that's a smaller volume in comparison to in lieu. Second question, do you plan on using managed aquifer recharge in farm fields or via dry wells? Again, it sounds like you have a lot of familiarity with this type of infiltration. Not at this time. The bank does not include farm fields or dry wells, but the water bank, there is a potential for it to expand in the future after it becomes starts to implement. So that's always potentially a opportunity, but at this time, the project does not include that. Third question, how would the water bank deal with the winter like 2022, 2023? Yeah, that was great opportunity to take excess surface water. There were agencies in our region that were starting to operate in that manner. So there's already some operational behavior that's optimizing the amount of surface water, excess surface water. So hopefully that answers that question that you have. Ted Rao, is any consideration being given to deploying the 5% leave behind so that it contributes directly to GDEs and provide other direct environmental benefits? Yeah, good question, Ted. The 5% leave behind will contribute to basin sustainability. So there will be a contribution. It's hard to quantify exactly and identify the exact GDEs, but there is a benefit to groundwater dependent ecosystems because of any leave behind. But I take your question, Ted, as more directly. I see your point here. And at this time, we haven't identified recharge like an injection well directly next to a GDE, for example. But it would be good to talk to you more about that and just see what's possible there. Susan Pesci, will there be regulatory element within the water bank policy for compliant resolution? Complaint. So yeah, good question. Well, one of our goals is to be transparent and have that mechanism as described in the coordinating body governance slide, so that we can get information from stakeholders in an efficient and timely manner. This is a good one, though, that we could spend a little more time on and add to our list of items to make sure that we're addressing that. So I appreciate that question.
No other questions.
No other questions?
Q&A so far. Other questions for the team?
We're here till 7:30. I get paid till 7:30, so I'm here whether I get questions or not. So fire them at us.
Unidentified questioner. The water bank sounds like one of our region's largest adaptation strategies to less snow and more rain. Are you aware of other large-scale adaptation projects?
Gosh, I'm not as well versed in the American River Basin study as some. I'm not sure if anybody in the room can speak to other adaptation projects with any detail. I'm afraid I'll mischaracterize things. I just don't have the background.
So I am aware that other parts of the state are considering groundwater banking as a way to adapt to climate change and decreasing sort of liability of water supplies. But those are throughout the state. I'm not familiar with any here in the American River region.
So there are a couple of projects related to climate change response within the region. I think on the water supply side, though, there would be the River Arc project, which recently received funding from the Wildlife Conservation Board. And then there are some overlap of flood and water supply projects being administered or advanced by SACA. And then there's a host of other projects that we're looking at as RWA, which are not necessarily, they're smaller projects in some cases that add up to bigger projects, right? So we take a whole of watershed approach at RWA, looking from the mountaintops to the valley floor. The water bank is part of the valley floor, but at the top of the watershed, we have forest health projects so that reduce the threat of wildfire while potentially increasing water supply and certainly reducing the threats of water quality impacts from forest fires. And then we have water efficiency projects. Water efficiency work is a core function of RWA. 25 years work on that, and that will continue to speak up, or to be advanced moving forward. And I think that really covers the big projects at this point in time. But maybe yeah, if you could send an email on that question, we could give you a more detailed response even. Thanks.
And as it relates to that item, Paul Helliker has a statement, who's one of the program committee members. His statement: the biggest climate adaptation projects in the region are the levee improvement projects and the new spillway at Folsom Reservoir. So thanks, Paul, for chiming in. Susan Pesci, can you talk a little more about expanding the monitoring network to include domestic well regarding water levels and quality? So yeah, a monitoring program is incredibly important, obviously, for understanding what's happening out there as it relates to groundwater conditions, both from a GSP, groundwater sustainability, as well as the water bank project, which of course is part of the GSP. And the domestic wells Of course, knowing where they exist, as I mentioned, having really good data on that. We've had staff at the Regional Water Authority work diligently at making sure we understand and can reach out to those entities in the North American Subbasin. South American Basin is also doing a lot of work there. So knowing where those exist, obviously, is step one, and then having monitoring wells around those locations so you can understand groundwater conditions is what I would call step two. In the North American Subbasin, we're going to install a series of new monitoring wells. We're fortunate to get a state Department of Water Resources grant to further enhance under SGMA a monitoring well for our groundwater sustainability plan. So that in itself will help us even strengthen our understanding. We don't really have too many data gaps as it relates to monitoring wells near domestic wells. We have a pretty good handle on that, but we're even going to be able to get a better handle on that through some existing or some additional monitoring wells in the near future. I'm just trying to make sure I got your full question, Susan. Sorry. What else do you have there? Oh, regarding water levels and quality. Yeah, those monitoring wells also serve periodically. We collect water quality samples from those as part of a groundwater sustainability plan, so we can understand if there's any trends or changes in water quality that would impact beneficial uses and users. And obviously, we have some major contaminated Superfund sites, especially in the North American Subbasin, but those are fairly well delineated right now, those plumes, and wouldn't impact the water bank project, but we have to keep an eye on that when we start to implement the project.
Ryan is going to take
Okay, great.
Ryan, can you speak to the other water agencies looking for?
Yeah, sure. So, have a question from Barbara Evoy. Can you speak to any other agencies who are looking to use the same American River water as RWA for other projects? Is there a concern with others who want to use the same supplies? So I think the primary thing here in answering this, first of all, appreciate the question, it's a good question, is that the water bank is not seeking any new water rights. So it's water that there's already a right to that we're advancing. So in that sense, there should not be conflicts over any particular drop of water that would be going towards the water bank. I think to me that really answers that question, but again, hopefully it did just do that. But you know where to find us if that's not clear.
Another question, Barbara Washburn. More questions on 2022-2023 winter scenario. Is the infrastructure you currently have the capacity to use the kinds of volumes to produce water in large storms? There's a little typo here. I might be missing something. I'm concerned you might be overlooking capturing, storing floodwater, not just in lieu. What is the reason this hasn't been considered so far? So it relates to stormwater capture, your question, Barbara, and when we say we're taking excess water, it's largely flood flow. So we are looking at grabbing water that would otherwise have been lost as part of a flood flow acknowledged surface water available to the region. So you might have to restate your question, or maybe I could talk to you off to the side to make sure I understand it and get at what you're after exactly. I apologize, I just can't quite see it the way it's in front of me. Next question, Susan Pesci. There are many domestic wells in the SASB, South American Subbasin, with the Deer Creek and Cosumnes watershed. So there is a relationship. Is there more to that? Oh, between ecosystems and beneficial uses. Will that relationship be captured in the water bank? Yeah, good question. I don't work specifically in the South American subbasin, so I'm not 100% familiar with the Deer Creek and the relationship down there. So I can't speak to it in detail. But when we're modeling water bank and looking at how the water will be recovered, we are going to look at the relationships with groundwater dependent ecosystems and domestic well users. So again, I can't speak to the specifics in that basin. I might need to follow up with you with somebody that knows the South American subbasin really well. Ted Rao, the state is advancing funding for FloodMar. UC Davis researchers have identified areas in our region with high connection to the deep aquifer, and the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency has a long-range series of projects in this area. Why is the bank project not actively considering this stormwater management supply source? Yes, good question. Ryan's raising his hand, so I'm gonna pick on him. And maybe he was just stretching, but it's too late now.
That's fine. Great question, Ted. I think first things first on the water bank, right? As Trevor presented, we're talking about reoperation of existing infrastructure at this stage of the project. That does not preclude looking at those kinds of things that you're speaking about moving forward. But I do want to say that I appreciate that input, and that's something that we will consider, you know, how that can possibly be incorporated moving forward. So, yeah, thanks. And I was.
You was stretching. Yeah, I mean, I think what I'd add is, you know, our project is really starting with the urban core for the most part. And so I'm sure there's additional opportunities that we'll look at as the water bank gets going and we have the opportunity to potentially expand operations in the future. Barbara Washburn, sorry for the typos, no problem. If you're doing in lieu, I'm guessing you will directly use flood flows and leave groundwater in the ground. Yes, that's right. That's how that will work. Is existing infrastructure size able enough to use all the flood water that might be available? If you integrated MAR more, could more be captured? I think it's that last question. Yeah, great question. No, we cannot obtain, not even close to all the floodwater that is available. I mean, when there's excess flows, they greatly exceed our existing infrastructure or even a foreseeable, you know, expansion of infrastructure. When those periods are occurring, there is way more than we could capture. In the future, we plan to expand infrastructure and be able to capture more water. But there is a lot of water during those periods. And I just don't want to throw numbers out there, but that's something that we could probably put into context more with percents at a future meeting or our follow-up, because it's a very small number, the amount of water excess flows that we're essentially obtaining from these surface water features during those periods. All right.
We got 12 more minutes.
Ryan's staying very still now. He's not moving his arms. And we'll just stay on silent. If folks have questions or if anybody joined late wants to jump in with questions, we'll stay on for the next 11 minutes or so. What's that? Okay, good. Sorry, I thought there was a technical detail. Yeah, Barbara Evoy, thank you. When do you anticipate the next meeting, and what milestones do you feel will be presented? Yeah, good question. We never map out these meetings on a routine schedule because we just want to make sure that it's timely and that we have information to share. This project's a planning project and kind of evolves a little bit as we get into it. So we don't have a regular stakeholder forum meeting schedule as you've seen. So I think as shown on that bar chart, we are anticipating at a minimum that a stakeholder forum meeting would be most likely in the late summer timeframe. At that point, we'll have some modeling results to discuss. We'll have a water accounting framework to get input on. Those two items in particular are going to be big ones, both of them, and we'll take kind of a lot of presentation material and a lot of feedback, hopefully from the group. So those are kind of the next big milestones to work through. Couple more questions. Barbara, Susan Pesci, in previous discussions, the water bank ag-res had been included for storage in compensated for storage. I'm not sure why I can't read. Is that anticipated in the future? Ag-res had been included for storage. I don't think we included ag-res in prior presentations. I'm wondering if we talked a little bit about the expansion, the potential for ag in the future. There was some slides where we talked about starting with municipal and industrial, and that ag is an opportunity. And so those slides, I think, are out there, but we haven't really gotten into that.
For agriculture that can do conjunctive use operations.
Yeah.
Not necessarily ag-res.
Yep.
Early in 2016, 17, Suzanne posted.
Oh, in early 2016, 2017?
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes back. That's a great water bank knowledge. So I'd have to go back and see. I wasn't part of the organization at that time. It's certainly possible that we put out some information. I'm not saying you're not right. Just that I just don't know in context how it fit into where we're at now. Sorry about that.
So I think also just closing on this, right? It's not part of what we're considering at this point in time or proposing in the environmental process. So it may be something for future consideration, but it isn't something that we're looking to advance the ag-res at this point in time.
Next question, Jay Boatwright. If flood flows occur during the summer, the region probably can use all that water. I think there is not enough demand in the winter to properly and safely capture flows since recharge is by water that has been treated. Is this correct? Not in lieu recharge. Yeah, thanks, Jay. You're right. There's not enough demand in the winter. But that provides an opportunity to offset demand that was historically met by groundwater. Barbara, what modeling is being done to answer water bank questions? Since the GSPs, there has not been, to my knowledge, a major rework of the model and results. What can we expect? Yeah, good question. And you're right, there has been some work done, using the modeling for different agencies for looking at different questions and projects. But you're right, the bank will be, I think, the first time that the model has been used, at least in the North American, I believe in the South American too, in this manner to really look at operations kind of holistically. So we're using both kind of the best of the best surface water and the best of the best groundwater. And actually, there's been a ton of work to make sure that the data that's being utilized in both models is the best data. And so what I mean by that is there's the calcium model that's really used to look at surface water flows. That model is being used for this project. There's the groundwater model, the COSANA model, and I think that's the model you're probably more referring to. That's a very advanced model that's used in the North American, South American, and Cosumnes Basin. That's a plus that we have one model that actually is the same model that we can use in both the North and South American basins, because obviously banking activities will extend and be modeled in both those basins, excuse me. So we're going to run a lot of scenarios, looking at different operations of recovery as it relates to banking and recharge to get a sense of how those operations will be consistent, hopefully, with the minimum thresholds established at our representative monitoring points to meet SGMA compliance in both basins. So a lot of work's going to be done there to look at that. We're also using the groundwater model and surface water models, especially the groundwater model, to look at stream depletion and stream accretions. The mere fact that the water bank operates with recharge before recovery, meaning we're storing water in the basin, causing actual accretions to streams before we pump that water out, which causes depletions, provides a benefit in that we hopefully will not be having a negative effect on streams, because we're going to be actually, through our recharge activities, adding water to the streams. A lot of that depends, though, on the delta conditions at that time, whether the delta is in excess or balance conditions. So there's a lot of layers of complexity that need to be modeled to look at that dynamic. So all of that work, we have a modeling team. A team is no joke. We have a team of modelers working on that aspect and working to lay out those scenarios right now. So there's a lot of work related to modeling that we'll see this year. It's going to be an exciting year for the groundwater scientists, geeks out there like myself, to see how this all plays out.
The last question from Barbara Washburn.
Thanks, Barbara Washburn. I realize you're taking on a huge project, but by not doing infiltration of floodwater, you can't address the biggest question I often hear from stakeholders. How can we utilize all those floodwater to address the overdraft and address the impacts of climate change on our water resources? So, Barbara, we are taking excess water, so it's during flood flows. So we are infiltrating that water. We're just not infiltrating it using direct recharge techniques like surface spreading basins. So you're right. It's a huge project where we are addressing that question just using a different recharge technique, the way I understand your question. And so that does address overdraft and address impacts to climate change. So, we're doing this for regional water reliability purposes, to provide maybe external benefits for climate adaptation and for ecosystem benefits. So how that works, and again, we've seen it happen historically through conjunctive use, is we've seen the water levels increase. We actually have done some analysis to show that if we did not historically do some of that conjunctive use, it's not clear that we'd have a sustainable groundwater basins that we have today. So that's already paid dividends, those activities. We're just taking that process, we're expanding it because we're going to be a federally recognized bank and have the ability to have more flexibility in terms of the types of surface water that we can take, the types of flood flows, and really upping our game, and then having a more robust governance structure, modeling, monitoring, analysis, to make sure that we're actually contributing to sustainability as we plan, and not creating any negative effects. So sorry for the long answer, but that's really I think what we're doing is what you laid out.
And Ted Rao gets to close us out with the last question.
All right, Ted, congrats, you get the last question. How will the following situation be managed? The bank depositors want to withdraw when at the same time other users have withdrawn the subbase and below great sustainability levels. Sorry, Ted, I got to great question before I finished the question. Good question. That is a great question. So that requires a couple of different things. And it is a very, legitimate concern that we've heard elsewhere. So and that's how the accounting system works. So the GSP, and that account needs to be managed accordingly so that it's being operated sustainably. You cannot have a bunch of unanticipated, all of a sudden groundwater use outside, that's not part of the water bank, that draws the water table down to unsustainable levels. The water bank is operating on top of that account, if you will, that water budget. So the analogy would be like you have a bank, you deposit money in a bank, and your neighbor also has uses the same bank. And all of a sudden your neighbor withdraws a bunch of money from that bank, and you go to that bank and the bank says, hey, I can't give you any money. Well, that can't work. That same thing with the water bank. The water bank account, we're going to need to be able to exercise that water bank volume for those benefits we described, so that both the water bank is going to need to be operated in a sustainable manner through the goals, objectives, principles, and constraints, and the existing groundwater sustainability plans and GSAs are going to have to do the same thing. And that's why there's some synergy there. But if both entities operate effectively and according to their plans, the bank will work successfully. It's not to say that we won't have bumps in the road, that operations modeling won't be perfect, possibly, and we see water levels draw down where we didn't anticipate, but we're going to have to work through adaptive management to work in a different manner so that we're not creating any impact. So great question. I could talk about that one probably to nauseum, so I will stop here. And we're a little past 7:30, so I want to thank everybody personally for the input this evening, and thanks for all the great questions on behalf of our entire group. And with that, I think again, please see our website, and we'll close it out. So appreciate that.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you very much.